Hello everyone, it's Martin aka Anders, and I'm gonna keep that flow of full release content coming for you. This is another video that a ton of people have been asking me to do. I'm gonna briefly cover the new agent Reyna, where I think she fits into the metagame, and whether or not I think that fit and that spot will allow her to have a significant presence in pro player, if I think she's gonna predominantly sit on the sidelines. And so without further ado, let's get right into it. Diving right into things with Reyna, I'm going to skip over doing a high-level overview of her kit. I think that there are a ton of those already on YouTube, and it seems a bit redundant, seeing as many of you are probably already playing her on live servers. So just to quickly gloss over things, C is Leer, that's going to be her totem-based flash ability. Q, Devour, is going to be her ability where she consumes souls to heal herself. E, Dismiss, is where she consumes souls to make herself invulnerable. And X, Empress, is her ultimate, which gives her unlimited charges of both Q and E, also empowering them, causing her Q to be auto-cast whenever she kills somebody, and causing her E to make her fully invisible in addition to the standard invuln. In addition to the unlimited charges and amplifications to Q and E, she also has a passive stimulant where she gets increased reload times, increased fire speed, classic Brimstone Stimpack type stuff. Now moving into the interesting stuff, where Reyna fits into the metagame, the easiest way to tackle this is to first start by comparing her to the agent who is nearest her. That agent, for a long list of reasons, is Jett. I'm going to do this seemingly a little bit out of order, but it'll all make sense in the end. I'm going to start with the differences between these two agents. If we take a look at how I've structured this Venn diagram, this is obviously very surface level. I didn't do a super deep dive, but what it does show is I've mirrored every attribute on both sides so that it specifically highlights the nuanced dichotomy between the two agents, as opposed to just making exhaustive lists. Starting from the top, we have the economic considerations of both of the agents. In Jett's case, we all know that she's an incredibly strong op user, and so her peak use case requires that you have a strong economy. You have to be able to buy that op to really use her to her fullest. By comparison, if we look at Reyna, she's at her best when she's running and gunning and basically just under standard rifling economic conditions, so it's quite a bit less restrictive. This next set of bullets may not seem immediately related, and it's a little bit difficult to phrase this in a way where I can communicate effectively what I'm getting at, but I'm trying to point out a pretty significant nuance in how the two agents play. Despite the fact that both agents' playstyles are inherently selfish, how they're selfish is very different. In Jett's case, you have an agent who is playing for picks, playing selfishly, playing separate from her team, but doing so in a way that is filled to the brim with finesse, engagement selection, being extremely proactive around enemy positioning, whereas Reyna kind of just sends it. I mean, that might be me oversimplifying it because I haven't seen the agent played at an extremely high level yet, but she lacks a lot of these skills that would be required to have that sort of engagement selection that Jett is able to make use of. Letting this swirl around in my head a bit more, I actually think the easiest way to think about it is if you contextualize Jett's kit through the lens of how easily it can be flexed between aggressive and defensive use cases. All of her abilities give you an inbuilt option to use it aggressively to dash onto a site, or to use it defensively to dash out of an LOS if you fail to make a shot connection. And Reyna lacks a lot of that flexibility. A flash is by itself going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to be using it aggressively 99.999% of the time. And her other two abilities require that you already have kills, so fundamentally have to be played aggressively. Pivoting perfectly from the topic of their kits, we have team utility. In Jett's case, we obviously just saw her Cloudburst, her smoke get a substantial duration increase. This is now a non-negligible piece of team kit. This will be used in executes now and be planned around, whereas before it was really just a sort of secondary LOS break if she got herself into a sticky situation. If we look at Reyna by comparison, all she has going for her in terms of team utility is Leer, and it's really not that great a piece of team utility. From what I've seen, it's relatively unreliable, and I'm going to be completely blunt, it's probably the worst flash in the game. That probably seems like an aggressively hot take given how bad Omen's flash was historically, but where this flash can quite literally be destroyed if the person you're flashing has quick enough reflexes, I don't see how this is anything other than mediocre. I would not be surprised in the least to see this patch to have a slightly longer duration in the relatively near future. The last bullet, and I think this is honestly the one that people are underestimating the most, is that Jett was around in beta and Reyna wasn't. Even if you give pros like 1, 2, 3 weeks, whatever it may be before ranked comes out, to play this agent, none of them are going to have even marginally the same level of comfort as they do on Jett, and so that by itself puts Reyna way down on the totem pole. And while this is the sort of issue that'll just self-resolve over time, it's not going to solve itself in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. It'll be probably a month to a month and a half before we have players who are consistently like, oh yeah, I'm an awesome Reyna player who consistently uses Empress E's correctly. Like, that's just not going to be there. And that brings us to their similarities. This is what will sort of define where I think Reyna will fit into the overall meta. First up, we have the fact that both of these agents are very aggressive lone wolf type playstyles. They're both looking for picks. They're rarely going to play in a coordinated effort with their teams. If they are, it's going to be from a flank angle, and that has a certain number of requirements attached to it. Specifically, the teams that play host to these agents have to be comfortable operating without them. You have to create 4 agent cores that are so comprehensive that you can completely remove their 5th person and have them not feel worse for it. Next up, we have the snowballing nature of both of these agents. They both are looking for kills, they both have mechanics that reward getting kills, and once they start getting them, it starts raining blood. And while in Jett's case, that pop-off mechanic is a little bit more limited in her ultimate, in Reyna's case, like, it is the core concept of her entire agent. When she pops off, she pops off. Last up, we have the other side of the coin from the lone wolf aggressive playstyles, which is everything is super high risk, super high reward. When you are habitually splitting from your team, half the time you're going to get picks and be the hero, half the time you're going to get picked off and feel like an idiot. So based on these overarching comparisons and these sort of archetypal agent similarities, I think that the most likely spot for Reyna to end up in the meta is quite literally just stealing Jett's spot in a couple of comps. If we start taking a look at what those comps might be, it's nothing but familiar faces. You see the Common Core plus Jett and the Molten Core plus Jett that can easily be transmuted into Common Core plus Reyna and Molten Core plus Reyna. This covers that concept I mentioned earlier, where the 4-man unit that's separated from the agent in question has to be able to operate as a separate unit, and the Common Core and Molten Cores are a perfect example of that in practice. That said, there is still one major archetype though that isn't mentioned in Shock and Awe. The most prolific iteration of Shock and Awe is Shock and Awe plus Cypher, and so if we slot in Reyna, what might that look like? If we take a traditional approach to the archetype and bring in Reyna for Cypher, I think you end up breaching that concept of a 4-unit core that can function on its own. While Brimstone, Raze, Sage, and Sova are all phenomenal agents, I don't think that they represent a self-sufficient unit. They lack a lot of the defensive utility that would be necessary to be able to play out either side of the map on a consistent basis. Given that, I would lean into an alternative configuration where you're actually bringing in Reyna for Raze. The end result is a composition with a terrifyingly resolute defensive core. It's basically a brick wall, and then you have that brick wall fronted by an extremely aggressive spear point in Reyna. This is probably my favorite version of any composition that would be running this agent. And so that gives us our top 3 Reyna comps, if you will, that I would expect to see in the metagame. If we do some light rearranging, you realize that these comps are more or less identical across the board. You have Brimstone, Cypher, and Sage in all 3 versions. You obviously have Reyna in all 3 versions, and the only divergent element is that in the Molten Core and Common Core versions, you bring in Entry Fragger utility, and in the Augmented Shock and Awe version, you bring in more versatile defensive utility and intel gathering ability. If you then look at these 3 compositions and reframe them in that context, it sort of reaffirms what I was getting at, where I think the version with Sova is the best composition. It remains to be seen whether or not Lear and Reyna's kit is well lent to being an entry fragger, and so it wouldn't shock me to see the versions of this composition with entry fraggers being the more prolific, but in the event that Reyna can effectively play as an entry, the version with Sova will just have more fundamental versatility than either of the other 2. And that leaves us with the $1 million question of, Now that we know where she would slot into the meta, do I think it'll actually happen? And unfortunately, the answer is no. In spite of all her bells and whistles, I don't think Reyna is going to see a lot of play. The fact of the matter is that her kit is too shallow to make her a truly effective entry fragger, and she doesn't fill any other niche for a team. If you look at Jett, she is a standalone aggressive agent, doesn't have an incredibly deep kit, but fills a very unique position in that she can fill an opera role. I don't think that Reyna is well suited to being an opera. She's literally just a running gun who is dream team material for frag movie type stuff, but just isn't well suited to a coordinated team environment. I'm sure we'll see her a couple of times, and I'm sure we'll even see her pop off a couple of times. Once she gets that snowball rolling, I mean, she can go off the deep end in a hurry. So I'm sure we'll see that, but that doesn't make her a good agent for competitive. I don't think that seeing her pop off a couple times in pro play substantiates her actually being a rational choice for most teams that are looking to be highly successful in the competitive ecosystem. And so that about wraps us up. Reyna's a super cool agent, but at the end of the day, from my perspective, as someone who's almost strictly interested in the competitive ecosystem for this game, I think she comes up short. And I don't think that's going to change anytime in the near future. Like I mentioned earlier, there might be a universe where they buff Lear and it gives her a strong enough entry tool that that composition where she's with Sova has a broad enough pool of utility where it feels almost as good as the common core plus Sova, which is what that ultimately is closest to mimicking. But let me know your guys' thoughts. Comment down below. Do you think Reyna is going to pop off? Do you think I'm absolutely crazy for saying that she's not going to be seen a ton in pro play? Let me know. I'm super interested. As always, if you're enjoying my content, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell. And you can also catch me on other social media at Twitter as well as Instagram at AnderzzTV. You can also catch me streaming when I finally get around to playing Valorant again at Twitch at AnderzzTV. As always, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one.